120 days. That is the total time Jerome Powell had remaining before Donald Trump regained power. 120 days to ready himself for a confrontation that could potentially obliterate the Federal Reserve's autonomy permanently. November 5th, 2024, election night. As the results began to come in and it became evident that Trump had emerged victorious, Jerome Powell was seated in his home office observing the broadcast. His expression was composed, indiscernible. However, those who are familiar with him assert that on that night, for the first time in his professional life, Powell appeared genuinely anxious, because he was aware of what lay ahead. Trump had dedicated the entirety of his campaign to vowing retribution against the individual he held responsible for the economic difficulties during his initial term. The individual he had appointed as Fed chairman in 2018, only to later turn against with ferocity. The individual he labeled as clueless, the enemy, and a greater threat than China. And now Trump was returning, with a mandate, with grievances, and with a strategy. This narrative chronicles those 120 days, the countdown to Inauguration Day, the most intense political pressure campaign ever directed at a Federal Reserve chairman, a constitutional crisis brewing in plain view, and one man's choice to resist or capitulate. The countdown commenced at 11:47 p.m. on November 5th, when Fox News declared Pennsylvania for Trump. Jerome Powell had precisely 76 days until Donald Trump would be inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States. The battle for America's economic future had commenced. The threat becomes real. November 6, 2024, the day after, markets opened with caution as investors contemplated the implications of Trump's return on the independence of the Federal Reserve. Powell was set to hold a press conference at 2:30 p.m. following an FOMC meeting, and all eyes were on him to gauge his response to Trump's victory. At precisely 2:30, Powell approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and delivered what would become one of the most frequently cited statements of his career. Good afternoon. The Federal Open Market Committee has decided to maintain our policy rate target range, a standard introduction. However, the questions soon followed. The first reporter wasted no time. Chairman Powell, President-elect Trump has indicated he wishes to dismiss you. Will you resign if he requests it? Powell's reply was immediate, cold and unequivocal. No, just one word. No elaboration, no diplomatic nuances, merely no. The reporter pressed on. Do you believe a president has the authority to dismiss a Federal Reserve chair? Powell leaned in slightly. Not permitted under the law. Not what? The reporter inquired, unsure if he had heard correctly. Powell reiterated slowly, stressing each word. Not permitted under the law. The room fell silent. This was not the usual measured and diplomatic Jerome Powell. This was a definitive stance. This was a declaration of conflict. Within moments, the clip circulated widely. Twitter erupted. Cable news replayed it incessantly. Financial markets responded. Stocks surged, interpreting Powell's defiance as a pledge to stability. However, Trump's allies were outraged. Steve Bannon on his podcast remarked, Powell just disrespected the president-elect on national television. This is the deep state at its worst. Trump needs to eliminate him. Charlie Kirk stated, Powell believes he is untouchable. He is about to discover otherwise. And Trump himself, at 11:03 p.m. that evening, posted on Truth Social, the Federal Reserve chairman has a lot of audacity. I appointed him. I can remove him. The question is when, not if. Too late on everything. Fired. The countdown had begun. 75 days until inauguration. The pressure campaign commences, November-December 2024. Trump's transition team did not wait for the inauguration to begin their assault on Powell. They initiated a coordinated pressure campaign that was unprecedented for a Federal Reserve chairman. The strategy was multifaceted. Attack 1, public humiliation. Trump assigned Powell a derogatory nickname, Late Powell. He utilized it incessantly, in speeches, interviews, and on social media. The branding was intentional, aimed at making Powell synonymous with failure and incompetence. Jerome Late Powell has ruined the economy with his elevated interest rates. Families are unable to afford homes. Businesses cannot secure loans, all due to too late. It was effective. By December, conservative media had embraced the moniker. Powell was unable to escape its grasp. Attack 2, the renovation scandal. An individual from Trump's team, sources later indicated OMB Director Russell Vought, uncovered that the renovation project for the Federal Reserve building was significantly over budget. Originally projected at $1.9 billion, expenses had surged to $2.5 billion. This was ideal ammunition. On December 12th, Vought dispatched a public letter to Powell, accusing him of gross mismanagement regarding the renovation. He suggested potential fraud and demanded explanations. Powell replied in a professional manner, detailing construction delays and unforeseen structural issues. However, Trump sensed an opportunity. $2.5 billion for a building renovation. That constitutes fraud. Powell ought to be investigated, perhaps even prosecuted. This is why he must be removed. Attack 3. The replacement campaign. Trump began publicly interviewing possible successors. Treasury Secretary nominee Scott Bessent, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh. He openly discussed them, compared them to Powell, made it evident, I am in search of your replacement. The message to Powell, you are already insignificant, I have moved on. Attack 4. Legal intimidation. In mid-December, reports emerged indicating that Trump's legal team was investigating the possibility of a president dismissing a Federal Reserve chair. Several law firms were involved in this inquiry, and constitutional scholars were being consulted. Trump himself confirmed this. My lawyers inform me that I can indeed fire him if I choose to. We are exploring all possibilities. Legal experts responded swiftly, asserting that the Federal Reserve Act stipulates that Fed governors can only be removed for cause, which includes fraud, malfeasance, or corruption, but not mere policy disagreements. However, Trump's team had discovered a noteworthy 2020 Supreme Court case, Salah Law LLC v. CFPB, which implied that presidents might possess greater authority to remove certain officials than was previously understood. Perhaps Trump's lawyers contended this precedent could be interpreted to include Fed chairs. Perhaps this was sufficient to instill doubt, sufficient to make Powell wary. 70 days until inauguration. Powell's dilemma. Behind the scenes, Powell encountered an untenable decision. Option 1. Resign. Some advisors discreetly recommended it. Step away. Allow Trump to appoint a successor. Safeguard your reputation. You have already secured the economy during COVID. Your legacy is assured. Powell declined. The moment I resigned due to a president's threats, he confided to his close associates. The independence of the Fed is compromised, not only for me but for every future chair. Option 2. Fight publicly. Conduct press conferences, deliver speeches advocating for Fed independence, garner support in Congress and on Wall Street. However, this could exacerbate the crisis. It would become personal. It would provide Trump with additional leverage. Option 3. Silent defiance. Perform your duties. Disregard the distractions. Formulate policy grounded in economics rather than politics. Allow the law to safeguard you. This was Powell's decision, the most challenging one, because it entailed enduring months of public criticism without retaliating. On December 18th, Powell held his final FOMC meeting of 2024. Reporters inquired whether Trump's threats influenced his decisions. The FOMC formulates policy based on our dual mandate: maximum employment and price stability. Political factors do not influence our discussions. They never have and they never will. Composed, professional, unyielding. Yet Trump remained undeterred. The holiday ambush, December 24, 2024. Christmas Eve. Most of America was gathered with family. Powell was at his residence in Virginia. The markets were closed. Everything was tranquil. Then Trump made a post. Merry Christmas to everyone except Late Powell, who has ruined the economy with his obstinate refusal to lower rates. I will rectify this immediately upon taking office. The Fed chair serves at the discretion of the president, regardless of what corrupt lawyers may assert. Powell, your time is over. On Christmas Eve, a blatant threat, challenging the legal principles of Fed independence. The markets were unable to react as they were closed. However, the message was unmistakable. There is no secure moment, no holiday, no respite. I am coming for you. Powell did not publicly respond. However, sources indicate that he spent Christmas Day communicating with his legal team, preparing for what he now understood was unavoidable. Trump would attempt to dismiss him. 60 days until inauguration. January, the final countdown. January 2025 marked a significant escalation. The shadow Fed chair. On January 8th, the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump intended to announce Powell's successor prior to the conclusion of Powell's term in May 2026. This move aimed to create a shadow Fed chair who would publicly comment on policy, participate in interviews, and undermine Powell's authority. Scott Bessent confirmed this strategy. The president-elect wants markets to be aware of who will guide monetary policy in the future. Certainty is crucial. This was a form of psychological warfare, rendering Powell a lame duck while he remained in office. The Republican letter. On January 12, 20 Republican senators endorsed a letter affirming Trump's right to ensure the Federal Reserve operates in America's best interest. The letter was carefully phrased to avoid an explicit call for Powell's dismissal, yet the underlying message was unmistakable. We stand with Trump, not you. Only 3 Republican senators declined to sign: Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins. The Wall Street panic. By mid-January, CEOs on Wall Street were in a state of panic. Their concern was not whether Trump would dismiss Powell, but rather the potential repercussions for the markets when he did. Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, privately warned Trump, "If you fire him, the bond market will collapse, Treasury yields will soar, you will bear the economic fallout." Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater, cautioned, "This would represent the most significant policy blunder of your presidency. Markets require Fed independence as much as fish require water." However, Trump remained resolute. For him, this was a matter of power. It was about not being limited by unelected officials. It was about seeking retribution against the individual who, in Trump's view, had undermined his first term. 50 days until inauguration. The legal battle heats up. January 15th, the Federalist Society, a conservative legal organization, released an analysis that shocked Trump's team. Conclusion: the president almost certainly cannot dismiss a Federal Reserve chair due to policy disagreements. The Supreme Court's ruling in Humphrey's Executor v. United States remains the governing law. This case involved FDR's attempt to remove a federal trade commissioner. The Supreme Court determined that he could not do so, emphasizing that independent agencies require protection from presidential caprices. The Federal Reserve was established in a similar manner. Independent shielded. Trump's legal team countered by referencing recent cases. However, even conservative legal experts expressed doubt. Peter Conti Brown, a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania, stated, "If Trump dismisses Powell, Powell will initiate a lawsuit. This will escalate to the Supreme Court, and even this Supreme Court would likely rule against Trump. The repercussions for the markets during that legal dispute would be disastrous." Yet what concerned Powell's supporters was the possibility that Trump might not be deterred by a court loss. What if the objective was the chaos itself? What if Trump's tactic was to render Fed independence politically so toxic that any successor to Powell would be too intimidated to confront presidents? 40 days until inauguration. The confrontation nobody saw, January 20th, 2025. Inauguration Day. Trump was sworn in. He delivered a defiant inaugural address, criticizing the failed policies of the past. Although he did not mention Powell by name, it was clear to everyone who he was referring to. That evening, Trump convened a private meeting with Powell at the White House. It was just the two of them, no aides, no notes. The details of what transpired in that room have never been fully revealed. However, sources close to both individuals have shared snippets of information. Trump purportedly proposed a deal to Powell: cut rates aggressively, provide me with what I desire, and I will leave you alone until your term concludes. Powell's alleged reply was, "I cannot formulate monetary policy based on your desires. I base it on economic data. That is my responsibility." Trump responded, "Then you're fired." Powell countered, "You can attempt that. We will see you in court." The meeting lasted for 27 minutes. With both men departing in anger, Trump quickly tweeted that Powell was impossible to work with, and that he will be gone soon. Powell refrained from making any public comments. However, the following morning, he arrived at the Fed at 7 a.m., as per usual, and commenced his work. The standoff, January-February 2025. For the next month, an uneasy standoff ensued. Trump launched daily attacks on Powell, who chose to ignore the criticism and concentrate on monetary policy. On February 4th, during the FOMC meeting, Powell decided to maintain the current interest rates, citing concerns about inflation stemming from Trump's proposed tariffs. In response, Trump erupted on Truth Social, declaring, "Powell is sabotaging the economy to make me look bad. Fired." However, he did not actually dismiss Powell, as his legal advisors repeatedly cautioned him. "You will lose in court, the markets will crash, the Democrats will impeach you for undermining the independence of the Federal Reserve." Consequently, Trump opted for an alternative approach to exert pressure on the other Federal Reserve governors. He began to criticize Fed Governor Lisa Cook, insinuating that she should step down. He also pressured Republican-appointed governors Michelle Bowman and Christopher Waller to oppose Powell in rate-related decisions. This strategy began to yield results. At the March FOMC meeting, both Bowman and Waller voted to lower rates, diverging from Powell's stance. Trump proclaimed victory, stating, "Powell is losing control of his own committee. He's finished." The question nobody can answer. As of today, the standoff persists. Powell's tenure as chairman concludes on May 15, 2026, merely 5 months from now. However, his position as a Fed governor remains until 2028. Trump has 3 alternatives. 1. Wait for Powell to finish his term. Allow his chairmanship to lapse. Appoint a successor. Powell will continue as a regular governor, but will lose influence. This is the least risky option. 2. Dismiss him regardless. Risk a legal battle. Risk market turmoil. Yet convey a message. I have control over everything. 3. Coerce him into resigning. Continue the attacks. Persist in undermining him. Make his existence so challenging that he resigns. Claim victory without facing legal repercussions. Thus far, Powell has exhibited no indications of capitulation. He arrives at work, formulates policy, disregards Trump's assaults. He stands as a living testament to the independence of the Fed. Nevertheless, the pressure is unparalleled. The personal assaults, the doubts cast on his integrity, the efforts to tarnish his reputation. Can any individual endure such pressure indefinitely? What's really at stake? This situation transcends Jerome Powell. It encompasses much more than that. Should Trump manage to oust Powell, whether through dismissal or resignation, it establishes a precedent that will reverberate throughout America for generations to come. Future Federal Reserve chairs will understand, oppose a president, and you will face destruction. Formulate monetary policy grounded in economic principles, and you will be subjected to attacks, threats, and humiliation. They will be compelled to yield, to adapt, to factor presidential politics into their decision-making processes. When central banks forfeit their independence, inflation becomes a persistent issue. Politicians invariably seek lower interest rates. They consistently desire cheaper money. They always aim to stimulate the economy just prior to elections. This is the rationale behind the existence of independent central banks. They are tasked with making unpopular decisions that are essential for economic health. Turkey experienced a loss of central bank independence. Inflation soared to 85%. Argentina faced a similar fate. Inflation reached 201%. Venezuela lost its independence as well. Inflation skyrocketed to 2,000%. The independence of the Federal Reserve is not merely a theoretical notion. It serves as the cornerstone of America's economic stability. It is the reason the dollar holds the status of the world's reserve currency. It is the reason US Treasury bonds are regarded as the safest investment globally. Trump poses a threat to all of this simply because he disapproves of Jerome Powell's decisions regarding interest rates. The current status. As of December 2024, the situation remains unresolved. Powell continues as Fed chairman, term ending May 2026. Trump continues attacking him publicly. Legal experts say Trump can't fire him, but Trump's team keeps looking for ways. Markets remain nervous. Powell remains defiant. The big questions: will Trump try to fire Powell? Unknown. His advisors are divided. Some say do it, send a message. Others say the market fallout isn't worth it. Will Powell survive until May 2026? Probably, but he'll face attacks every single day. Who will replace Powell? Trump wants someone loyal, someone who will cut rates on command. Names like Kevin Hassett and Scott Bessent are circulating. But getting Senate confirmation for someone perceived as a Trump puppet might be difficult. What does this mean for Fed independence? Even if Powell survives, the precedent has been set. Presidents can wage public campaigns against Fed chairs, can try to intimidate them, can undermine their authority. The institution has been damaged. The question is how much? Epilogue. The next 120 days. Powell has managed to endure the initial 120 days of Trump's presidency. Just barely, under constant pressure, yet still resilient. Now, the subsequent 120 days await, and the 120 days that follow, until May 15, 2026. Each day, Trump will launch attacks. Each day, Powell must choose. Should I respond? Should I disregard it? Should I retaliate? At every FOMC meeting, he will confront the dilemma. Am I making this choice based on economic factors, or am I considering the political ramifications? During every press conference, journalists will inquire, are you planning to resign? Will Trump dismiss you? How do you react to his provocations? It is a form of psychological warfare, a slow erosion through numerous small injuries, and the entire world is observing to see if Jerome Powell will falter. Up to this point, he has not. He rises each morning at 6 a.m., travels to the Fed, evaluates economic indicators, makes policy choices, dismisses the Twitter assaults, returns home, and repeats the cycle. A man who has faith in institutions, in regulations, in autonomy, engaged in a struggle against a president who holds none of those values. The contest for the essence of the Federal Reserve persists, and the forthcoming 120 days will be crucial in determining whether the independence of the American central bank endures or perishes.